It is Saturday, April 30th, and thank you so much for joining us. We're joined now by Editor-in-Chief of the Daily Signal, Rob Bluey, and Carrie Sheffield, a senior fellow at the Independence Women's Forum. You know, Carrie, just this week, President Biden asked for $33 billion additional dollars for the war in Ukraine. Does this mean that the war is getting bigger?
It is, and it just shows how reckless and incompetent Biden was to prevent this. We know that the previous administration under President Trump, this sort of thing never happened because, for example, President Trump pushed forward sanctions against the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and that was a pipeline that is going to strengthen the ties and the dependence of Europe on Russian oil and energy. And so the fact that, or natural gas, the fact that that's just one policy, there are many things that Joe Biden did to encourage the reckless aggression of Putin. And so it's really sad. I think it's a little bit like the arsonist who lit the house on fire now calling the fire department and trying to get credit for it. Meanwhile, all of us are stuck footing the bill. Meanwhile, today we just got the economic numbers of the economy contracting by 1.4% in the first quarter. A big part of that is because of inflation, and inflation is driven by government spending. So unfortunately, this new, $30+ billion it's only going to add to inflation here at home.
Rob, what about this immigration policy from the Trump era that is being debated now, remain in Mexico?
Well, Armstrong, I think Carrie gets it exactly right. It seems that anything Joe Biden touches turns to chaos. It's a complete disaster, both foreign and domestic. And you bring up one of the most critical issues, which is immigration. There is the Remain in Mexico policy. There are a number of Trump administration policies that Biden came in and wiped away on day one and created a reckless situation in Texas and along the southern border. What he's now doing in May, he wants to get rid of Title 42, which has been in place to safeguard our country from illegal immigrants bringing COVID and other illnesses to America. This is going to only exacerbate the problem and make it significantly worse. Alejandro Mayorkas was on Capitol Hill this week facing calls for his impeachment. It is that bad, Armstrong, that members of Congress are ready to remove him from office.
Carrie, Dr. Fauci announced this week, and I want to use this quote, the U.S. is no longer in full-blown pandemic. He first said it on PBS, and then he repeated it to the major dailies. What is the president's director of, what is he saying to the American people?
He's given all sorts of mixed signals. I mean, that's if the sky is blue, Fauci will say it's purple one day, and then he'll say it's yellow the next day, and then he'll try to say that he said it was blue to begin with. So this is a guy who was anti-mask. He said it wasn't going to help, and then he was pro-mask, and then he was pro-3 masks. He refused to hold China accountable for their role in creating this virus. So I really don't think that most people in America now give much credence to what Dr. Fauci has to say. And the fact that he is skipping the White House Correspondents' Dinner on Saturday due to COVID concerns, but now he's trying to tell us that we shouldn't be concerned about COVID. Again, it's mixed signals all around.
I got to tell you something, Carrie. It's not a mixed signal for me. It's actually, Carrie, it's a message that many of us have believed for a long time, that there was a lot of fear. It was overblown. You didn't know who to believe. And I think maybe he had a conscious moment. He's saying we're no longer in full-blown pandemic, which means we're not wearing masks on airplanes. They're relaxing the masks. They're relaxing the vaccines. They're relaxing the boosters, which it means that Americans have turned the current, Carrie. I mean, Fauci, he could get it right every now and then.
If that were true, then why is Fauci's boss trying to get tens of billions of dollars of new pandemic spending from Congress?
Let me raise this with you. I'm glad you raised this.
They want more money. They want more money because money is more power, and that's what they want.
Let me answer that for you. I don't know if many Americans realize of all the money that has been spent on the pandemic, on the virus, on COVID, all the money that has been allocated, only 1% of that money has actually gone to the pandemic. They want that money for state governments so they can show up to give them the best shot at doing the best they can in the midterm elections. And they've gone to state governments that are flush with cash. So I can answer that for you. But still, I don't want to get away from something that's important here, Carrie. Americans can relax when it comes to the pandemic. That's what he's saying.
Yeah, and a lot of people are rejoicing. I flew on a plane 3 times earlier this month, but unfortunately it was pre the relaxation of the mask. So I look forward to stepping into an airport when I do it mask free. And I have to say the lipstick industry has probably suffered a lot in this pandemic because we couldn't wear lipstick under the mask. But the fact that Dr. Fauci is doing this, I think it really is the political science, not the actual infectious disease science. I think we all know that. But even with Fauci, wiggling out of this, the economy still is suffering in big part, as you mentioned, due to this wasteful COVID spending. When you treat the U.S. dollar like it's fake monopoly money and you throw and shell out trillions of dollars and think it's going to have no impact on the value of the U.S. dollar, you're kidding yourself. And so that's why we've had this contraction in the economy in first quarter of 22, and then the record inflation of 8.5%. And once you look at the wages of people, that's actually a pay cut. It says on paper you're getting a pay raise, but due to inflation, you're getting a pay cut. And that's due to this wasteful COVID spending.
Inflation is massive, Rob. The supply chain is not getting any better. Fuel costs are not getting any better. I mean, just downstairs of our studio, CVS is closed down. And as we were feminine, looking at the empty shelves, that's what you're reminded of when you go to the grocery stores. It's just not happening. I mean, is there anything that our president and this administration can do?
It doesn't seem so, Armstrong, because all of the solutions that they're putting forward, as you indicated, are the wrong ones. Spending more money is not the solution here. It is only exacerbating the problem. Carrie referenced the new economic numbers that are out. I mean, this is looking like the 1970s and early 1980s all over again. And unfortunately, we don't have Ronald Reagan rushing to the rescue in this case. Joe Biden is heading us down a path where I think not only are we going to see increased costs of energy as the summer months come upon us, but people are going to start to feel this really at the grocery store as well. Food prices are going to go through the roof because, let's face it, it requires energy for farmers and other food producers to be able to deliver those products to the shelves. And so not only are you going to have shortages, but you're going to see prices increase to the point where people are feeling it really badly. And Armstrong, here's the other thing we have to remember. Employers can't be giving out raises of 8% on an annual basis. I mean, most people, get a 3-4% pay increase. So they're losing out right from the starting point, even if they do get a pay raise in their paycheck every other week.
Carrie, let's talk. Jeff Bezos buys the Washington Post. He's celebrated, no criticism. It's like a hero saving the political paper of record of the world. And all of a sudden, my goodness, Elon Musk goes and buys Twitter. The left and the Democrats are perplexed. They go crazy. Obama, who has the biggest following on Twitter, loses 80,000 of his followers. All of a sudden, conservatives are going back to Twitter. My thing is, what is wrong with having balance? Why can't we just have balance in the conversation? Why can't we just hear both sides? Why is there such an angst when conservatives, and I don't know if Elon Musk is a conservative, steps up to the plate and I'm going to say I'm going to buy Twitter, and these people go mad. They do everything they can to malign him, to destroy him, to weaken him. What is happening to America?
It's because he came out and did something that these liberals don't like. When you look at the data, so Pew and others have done research of Twitter users. It's overwhelmingly liberal people who are on Twitter that create the most content. And so that's why they're so triggered by this. But the truth is that this is not just a big tech phenomenon in terms of the bias. We see it in academia. We see it, on college campuses. We see it in Hollywood and the media generally, that there's such an extreme leftward tilt that when anybody ever calls for any sort of balance, people freak out on the left because to them, the notion of balance means that you're supporting, in the case of Elon Musk, it's laughable. They say he wants to bring back apartheid through purchasing Twitter. The thing is, this is just a bald-faced partisan hypocrisy. They said none of this when he was doing Teslas, which they love. It's this virtue signaling to have a Tesla because of the, green energy benefits and electric cars. they saw him as a hero and they heralded him. And so now it reminds me actually of Dr. Ben Carson. You know, before he said anything about Obamacare and stepped up into politics, he was celebrated in American culture, especially Black culture, as this enormous, you know, visionary figure who did revolutionary things by separating co-joined twins through his work as a surgeon. And then as soon as he became political, then all hell broke loose. And it was the same thing with President Trump. President Trump had so many celebrity friends. Barbara Walters had a condo in Trump Tower, you know, and Hollywood loved him. But as soon as he came out as a Republican, that's when all hell broke loose. So at this point, it is so hollow. We've been to this rodeo before.
Finally, Rob, what are we not talking about in this conversation today that should be front and center?
Well, Armstrong, just if I could add on the Elon Musk thing, I think that the ideas that he's putting forward, such as bringing more transparency to the algorithm, applying a broad free speech standard of First Amendment, those are critical. But as far as other things that happened this week that I think we need to pay attention to, a very important case at the U.S. Supreme Court involving Coach Kennedy, a football coach who took a knee and prayed after football games in Washington State. Armstrong, this to me is just a perfect encapsulation of the war on religion that we find ourselves in. Here he was doing something voluntary, not requiring any of the other football players or participants in the game to join him. They did so voluntarily, and the school terminated him as a result of that. He's waited now, I think, something like 6 years for this case to make its way to the Supreme Court. And so we expect a decision here at the end of June with a lot of other monumental cases. And I know I'll be praying for Coach Kennedy and hoping that that these individuals who want to bring values and morals to schools are able to do so, even in a volunteer capacity. And so hopefully the justices get that one right.
Carrie, your final thoughts on something that we should talk about today?
No, I think just to add to what Rob said, it's a great case because that coach, it was, as he said, it was voluntary. And in fact, there were 2 students who came to him and said, I feel slightly uncomfortable about this. And guess what? Rather than retaliating, he actually made them the team captains. So I'll be praying as well. And I think also, this week we are looking here at Independent Women's Forum at the Federal Reserve. So anybody here who's watching this program, please call your senator and tell them to block the nomination of Lisa Cook. She is a racist who believes that people should be defined by their race. And she believes in reparations, and she wants to go way outside the Federal Reserve's mission, which is to prevent inflation and to increase employment. She instead has a racialized agenda that will divide America and distract us from, recovering. So please call your senator and tell them to block this nomination. Senate Republicans were able to block her temporarily this week, but again, call them to make this a permanent thing with Lisa Cook.
Well, I hope to see you all in your finest, your tux and your attire tonight at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. I plan to attend, so I look forward to running into both of you. Thank you for joining us. When we return, Congressman Mast is going to join us to talk about Marines being unfairly prosecuted. That and much more on this Saturday, April 30th edition of the Armstrong Williams Show. So, there's stories that happen with our men who give their lives and make sacrifices for us that are just unbelievable. There's a story, and I know you've heard about it in the news, about 3 Marines who were in a bar and someone was drinking and became bloody drunk. And they got into a little altercation, and the Marines went outside. The person followed them out. They got into a scuffle. And obviously, in this scuffle, the person who was attacking them slipped and fell and became unconscious. One of the Marines just happened to be a medic, and he stayed with him. In fact, they stayed overnight with him to make sure he was okay. But what they didn't realize, that when he left, he had a convulsion and drowned. And it's a tragic situation. Nothing happened for a year passed. All of a sudden, we have Gallagher in the media, and all of a sudden the Marines and the military want to make an example of what they're not going to tolerate. And now these kids are being court-martialed, and a possibility that they're going to serve 22 years in prison. Now, one of the cases have been dropped against one, and 2 remain. But Congressman Mast, who has served this country in just in the most patriotic way, is joining us. to talk about this situation. Congressman Mast, thank you for your service, and thank you so much for joining us, and talk about just the sadness of a year later, and now they're trying to court-martial them, and the possibility they could get 22 years in jail.
Yeah, men and women serve their country. They go out there, they're overseas. An altercation occurs, right? People are at a bar, they're out in their free time, an altercation occurs, and the people that are being charged right now, the Marines that are being charged right now, they didn't instigate a fight, they didn't go out there and start a brawl or anything. They were literally attacked. That's not disputed. They were not the aggressors, they were attacked. And then after somebody got knocked out, they rendered aid to this person that was an aggressor to them. But now because of that, they took that person back. They showed aid to them. They did the Good Samaritan work. They're basically, they're being charged and having their military careers ruined.
Talk about how the Gallagher case has impacted all this, Congressman.
Well, you have a situation here that the Marines want to make an example, in my opinion, of saying, well, we're just not going to tolerate this kind of behavior. Now what happened doesn't reach what they don't want to be tolerated. They're adjusting it to say what happened is something that we want to make an example of so that other things don't happen. They don't fit. One is not the same. What happened is not what they need to prevent happening in the military. What happened was there was a fight because somebody else attacked these Marines. These Marines defended themselves, rightly so, and then they rendered aid to the person that attacked them, brought them back to base, and now they're being strung up for it. It's just not right.
But even on a different issue, Congressman Mast, talk about what this does to the morale of people serving, who are considering serving, when they see something like this. Just is so anti-soldier, so anti-person who puts everything on the line, that you and I and every American enjoy the kind of freedoms that we celebrate today. What message is this sending?
Look, for the freedom fighter, the warrior, the person that goes out there and risks the last thought in their mind, the last breath in their lungs, the last beat in their heart in service to this country, it is morale debilitating. This kind of case where you go out there, like what happens to our police officers out there, saying that you're going to become these kind of targets, our military men and women are going to become these kind of targets. That's morale debilitating. Just like what's going on with members of the military that are kicked out for not wanting to get a vaccine for a host of different reasons. Their careers will be ruined after 20 years or 15 years or even 5 years or whatever it is. They're going to get kicked out. It's morale debilitating. Or you have situations there where the capability of the war fighter and them conducting war doesn't become the focus. Wokeness becomes the focus of the military. And every war fighter I know agrees that as we've spent the last 20 years out in our theaters of war, we've never encountered enemies that we're worried about the diversity of our assault forces. What we've only encountered is the brothers and sisters that have had our backs, that didn't care the color of your skin, by what name you called God, how many pennies you had in your pocket. There's so much going on with the military right now that is not focused on conducting the mission. It's focused on politics. And this attack against these Marines is just another example.
Congressman Brian Mast is in his third term representing the 18th Congressional District of Florida. He followed in his father's footsteps in the U.S. Army for more than 12 years, earning medals including the Bronze Star Medal, the Army Commendation Medal for Valor, and the Purple Heart Medal, and the Defense Meritorious Service Medal. You were deployed in Afghanistan. Talk about how the military culture has changed since your days as a soldier.
Well, when I was on the battlefield, you got to focus on the battle. And that's serious. Every split second of every decision, an inch to the left, an inch to the right, that can mean the life of an individual. That's the truth of it. It means the life of our brothers and sisters in arms, or the life of our enemies, who we also hold their lives in our hands. And when anything else becomes the focus, the life of the American warfighter who risks having their family handed a folded flag instead of receiving their hugs and their welcome is put at even greater risk in an inherently dangerous job. That is, as we discussed already, absolutely not what you owe to the morale of these service members, not what you owe to the dedication of what they're offering in defense of their country. And the biggest thing to me that has changed is this. As a member of Congress, I say this to my fellow lawmakers often. The direction of the United States of America has to be worthy of the sacrifice of its defenders. And right now, the direction that lawmakers and the administration are taking in the military and in so many other places of policy, whether it be national defense or border policy or education or all these other places, they're not making a direction that is worthy of the sacrifice of its defenders. And that can't be what happens for our service members.
I know people look at you on camera and they don't realize when you served in Afghanistan and you worked as a bomb disposal expert, and all of a sudden there was a joint operation and an explosion where you paid a huge price. It resulted in catastrophic injuries for yourself, which included the loss of both of your legs. But yet you never see yourself as a victim. You never complain. You still serve this country, and you advocate for these 3 Marines. And I think when you talk about these 3 Marines, I think one of the things that you should really bring home is how this has devastated their life, their way of life, their way of living, just the impact that this has on them after serving their country.
Well, think about service in the military. You're targeted by snipers. You got mortars lobbed at you, grenades thrown at you, bombs maybe dropped on your head. I lost 2 legs and a finger in combat because I was walking across an area littered with improvised explosive devices, which was my job as a bomb technician, right? These are daily occurrences in war. If you're a pilot, you fly beyond the lines of our enemy, you name it. You undertake those risks for what? That has to be the question that you answer. What is it for? What is worth that fight? And for me, it's always been worth the fight. When I look behind me and I see 50 stars and 13 red and white stripes, I say, I wake up under that and I get to decide that today is better than yesterday, or it's not. That's the opportunity that I fight for in America. And for all of our service members, you got that why of why you fight, your brothers and your sisters to your left and right that you would give anything for, and the things that you know and believe about our country. And those things are being diminished right now, which is, more than anything, what I think kills the morale of our service members, because the why for why we fight is being taken away.
So, Congressman, how do we change the trajectory for these Marines? Where is the decision made? What needs to change so they can be made whole? And why did they decide to drop 1 case and continue with 2?
Look, why is politics, in my opinion, 100% pure politics going on with the military and these cases of the Marines. It's not disputed. There's video footage. The video footage is not disputed that these Marines that are being charged, that they were not aggressors, they didn't go out there and seek a fight, they were attacked by other individuals, and then after this attack, these were medics, right? Somebody got hurt, in the midst of these guys defending themselves, and they did what medics do. They provide aid. These guys are familiar as anybody with trauma aid, being combat veterans. They know how to help people when they get hurt, and that's what they did. And so now the military is saying, we're going to throw you under the bus for this. The change of trajectory has to be throwing this case out. The change of trajectory has to be an apology from the military saying, we're sorry for ruining your military career, not advancing you to the next rank, making a situation where even if you are allowed to stay in, you're going to have some kind of mark on your record that's going to follow you in all likelihood and prevent you from getting you to where you otherwise might have found yourself in the military. There's a litany of things that need to happen for the military to make this right for those Marines.
Congressman, while you have us, talk about the Biden administration immigration policy, Title 42, and remain in Mexico?
Yeah, well, we could talk about this in length, right? You have a policy that the Trump administration put in place to protect Americans and their health specifically. That's the way that it was put in place. And you have millions, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people seeking to enter the United States of America legally, not run from Border Patrol agents, but actually run up to them and take advantage of the system that the Biden administration wants taken advantage of and say, hey, I want asylum. I'm traveling over here with some kids that I'm going to say are my family, but very likely are not even my family. I'm just going to lie and say that, but I want asylum. Let us be released into the country and we'll show up back to court never. That's basically the situation that you have with hundreds of thousands of people coming across our southern border. Title 42 is preventing that right now because of health, coronavirus. And you have Democrats in one hand trying to say, well, we still want Americans to wear masks, and we want to get that replaced, on aircraft and airplanes and things like that. But we want to get rid of that so that people can come across our border illegally and then try to get asylum and things like that. The policies don't add up. They want to get rid of it because they fundamentally want these people to enter our country illegally and not have any concern for the fact that, well, coronavirus is over in the United States of America. It's not necessarily over in other parts of Latin America. And we know nothing about those individuals that are coming across our border, to include there is no appropriate name, social security number, no background on their health. The American taxpayer is going to go out there and pay for their health care, their transportation, their lodging, their food, and a host of other things. It's just not right on so many different fronts. And Title 42 needs to stay in place. The Remain in Mexico policy needs to be something that stays in place so that people don't come into America illegally and the taxpayer has to deal with it.
Congressman Brian Mast, what is the morale of our military today?
Look, you have morale on two different fronts, all right? You have, number one, for the service member to service member relationship, that relationship is why we will do absolutely anything in combat. I would give my life for my brother or my sister to my left and right, and they would do the same for me. It's why we do what we do. That morale will always be strong because of our relationship to one another. But what you have right now is the why for why we join the military and become a part of this that is being eroded, right? I told you already. I fight so that every day I can wake up under 50 stars and 13 red and white stripes and know that I get to decide that today is better than yesterday, that I'm free, that my fellow Americans have freedom. That's being eroded. My reason to fight is being eroded by Democrats. So the morale to fight, in part, is being eroded because they're taking that away. But the will to fight against them eroding our country is stronger than ever. So I guess that's three parts that I'll talk about.
Congressman Brian Mast, 18th Congressional District out of Florida. Thank you for standing up for the three Marines. Thank you for your service to this country. And thank you for joining us for this edition of the Armstrong Williams Show today.
All the best.
When we return, a focus on teachers in the classroom. And welcome back to the broadcast, and thank you so much for joining us. Corey Walker is an Arlington educator, he's president of the Upper Arlington Education Coalition, an educational expert and a commentator. And he joins us today to talk about teachers in the classroom. Corey, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Give us your background.
So I am just like I'm from Chicago, Illinois. I attended both public schools and private schools growing up, so education is something that my family really believed in, highly valued, and something I really personally care a lot about. I do lots of community service work and organizing in terms of trying to help students, particularly students that are underserved by our educational system, disproportionately low income, mostly students of color, trying to help them, reach their educational potential. And so this is something that I very deeply care a lot about.
In helping these kids reach their educational potential, what do you find are the most glaring deficiencies and why?
Well, I think that when you look at the most glaring deficiencies, and again, I work with predominantly students of color, especially low-income students of color. For Black Latino kids, I mean, in a lot of cities like Chicago, Detroit, Milwaukee, you name it. I mean, you'll have, it's not surprising at all to see, like, maybe 10% of Black kids or Latino kids in the school that can do math and read at grade level, right? Very few of them are doing it above grade level, but the reality is that there are lots of schools in this country where if you were looking at an entire 8th grade class, not one kid can do fractions. So the reality is that the glaring issues are, I mean, they're just horrible. I mean, it's, in my opinion, one of the civil rights issues of our time. Kids cannot do basic, just very basic pre-algebra level concepts in math classes, and in many cases, they're barely functionally literate. It happens across the country, and it's a travesty, but I think that it can be reversed, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And quite frankly, I think large segments of our school system have just given up on these kids.
Cathy Pultz is also joining the conversation. She's president of the Upper Arlington Educational Coalition. But let me continue with you. When you talk about the algebra and the fraction, why is it that kids don't understand the basics? When you trace this back, and you've been involved in this, and we can feel your passion for it, is it the parents? Where are these deficiencies? And are these deficiencies corrected? And can they be corrected in a way where it can be like 60 or 70% and not 10 and 12%?
Yeah, I mean, I think that most educational research shows that parents are the most important factor. You can take a kid who, I mean, it may be the kid of 2 immigrants who come to this country with no money, but that kid many times can do math and a lot of times above their grade level. And the reality is because those parents are very involved. Those parents are making sure that their kids are doing their homework and are seeking additional educational opportunities. Those kids are not playing video games for 5 or 6 hours a day or watching Netflix for 5 hours a day. Those kids are actually, putting in work and trying to make sure that, and those parents are trying to make sure that those kids have what it takes to succeed, right? We live in a very competitive world. And I think, unfortunately, many families don't really understand that. And so from what I see is that a lot of parents assume that if they put their kids in a certain school or they put them in a quote unquote good school, that the school itself will do all the work of educating the kids and they don't have to do anything. When the reality is that in most cases it's the parents, right? The teacher will disseminate information, but the parents have to be the one to make sure that the kids are actually doing the homework, staying, are on pace to be able to understand concepts that they should at their age. And unfortunately, many parents are not picking up the ball there.
Cathy, welcome to the broadcast. Talk about the classroom, what teachers face every day. You heard what Corey was discussing, and I think it's very difficult to disagree with, but talk about the teachers in the classroom and their challenges.
The teachers today, well, anytime, have huge challenges because they are now expected to not only be the educator, but the therapist. We've got this social emotional learning. They're supposed to look at each child. And again, I don't know if you've talked about the COVID, but they are dealing with children from many different backgrounds. Parent involvement is key. And unfortunately, parents are pulled in so many directions. And right now, we have administrators who are asking teachers to focus more on this culture war than academics. And they're not able to spend their time focusing on reading, writing, and math and social studies and science because they're supposed to be teaching these other things. And they're getting it from all sides. Parents, administrators, parents want one thing. So it's a very challenging time to be a teacher.
But in spite of all that, in some cases, the talented 10, the 10%, the 15%, no matter what the circumstances are, they always learn and thrive in those environments? Is it because of the parent? Is it because of the teacher and the way they create and teach in the classroom as if the teacher is teaching exclusively to them? What is it that makes kids more adaptable to learning and make the most out of that educational experience?
Wow. That to me, that's a tough question. I'm not sure we totally know why some kids just thrive in any environment. But I think you need to look at the style of the way they're being taught. Some kids are more traditional learners. Some kids are more tactile learners. And so that makes a difference in every classroom as well, if the teachers can reach those kids in that way.
So let me come back to you, because I can tell that question caught you a little off guard. So let me help you out here. What are the most significant issues in education this year?
This year, I think we have to look at academics, because I think the academics across this country, I know in the community where I live, the academics are going down. They, in all areas, from our elementary schools to our high school, our rankings have tanked in the past 8 years, and you can't just blame it on COVID. And I think that there are outside forces coming in and really asking our teachers to focus on other things. And we have the CRT and the social emotional learning and the diversity, equity, and inclusion, where teachers, their professional development is on those areas, as opposed to, hey, what's the best practice for teaching reading? What's the best practice for teaching math? So I think, and it's not any of the teachers' faults, it's just that they are being asked to do more than they should. Instead of being educators, they're asked at this point now to be therapists.
You know, Corey, a long-term nationwide teacher shortage and pandemic-related burnout have led school districts around this country to offer 4-day school weeks. Now, some of these districts, some of them, hope a shortened week will incentivize weary teachers to stay put. Do you think a shortened week benefit educators in practice while limiting consequences for students?
No, I mean, I would say that, we've had an entire, basically 2 years where kids have lost so much progress because of COVID. We all know that remote learning was a disaster, and there was effectively no gain whatsoever in that year where kids were just, sitting and looking at a laptop and weren't in class. So the fact that kids are having even shorter school weeks is just a disaster, in my opinion. Kids need to be in school, and quite frankly, some places maybe need to consider doing Saturday classes as well. Kids need to make up the lost time that happened as a result of COVID. I think teachers are dealing with a lot of burnout, obviously, but quite frankly, part of that I think is just on the blame of the teachers' unions for playing these games in terms of not allowing students to come back and not allowing students to, quite frankly, not wear masks. I mean, we've known that students and people under 18 were by far the least likely to get sick from COVID seriously or die. But I mean, kids were forced to wear those masks. Teachers had to enforce them, and in many cases had to deal with angry parents. So yes, I mean, I do think that there was a lot of burnout that teachers had to deal with. But quite frankly, I think teachers' unions deserve a large segment of that blame. And now they're trying to, make school weeks shorter under the guise of, I'll help students and I'll help teachers from dealing with burnout. But the reality is this: kids need to be in school. And having shorter school weeks is really a disaster, and it hurts the kids who need it the most. And I guarantee you that kids from affluent families, they're going to make sure that their kids are getting a quality education, whether that means putting them in a private program like Kumon or something else. But the kids who can't afford that, those are the ones that are really suffering from that sort of setup.
It is so refreshing to hear the truth. It's just so refreshing, because you ask yourself, who comes up with these ideas and manipulate us into believing this is going to help them with their progress? And we know it's crazy.
Yeah.
It is. We'll be back. You know, one has to wonder who sits around and come up with these ideas that just further exacerbates the problem, Carol, Cathy?
Well, I finished reading, there's a book called Race to the Bottom, which says what's happening to our schools by Luke Rosiak, because I had wondered, where is this funding coming from that is turning our schools upside down? Because our teachers know how to teach the basics. And there is a lot of funding from foundations, and it's just they pay each other, they give teachers grants to learn how to teach the CRT or the DEI or the social emotional learning. And again, our kids are caught in the crosshairs. Parents don't know what's going on. Their superintendents tell them what to do, and it is crazy. I love how, I agree, you got to be in school 5 days. You don't learn if you're not. And there's so much money. The federal government threw money at these schools through COVID, and I don't think they're using it to really help the kids academically. You can hire more teachers, you can hire tutors instead of parents having to do it. So our education system needs a lot of help.
Corey, what else is unknown that we don't talk about in terms of this education? Because obviously you've put a lot of research, a lot of study, a lot of time, a lot of experience in this. Educate us, please.
I think there's a lot of people who think that because you fund school districts more, you give teachers more money, that's going to lead to better outcomes. I can't count how many times people have told me, oh, well, you know, inner city schools in places like Chicago or Detroit or Baltimore fail or struggle because they don't get as much funding as the wealthy school districts or the predominantly white school districts. The reality is that inner city schools receive just as much funding as suburban affluent schools. Yes, they have more fixed costs, right? So like kids in the inner city may need they may need breakfast, right? Because they can't get breakfast at home, or they may need some sort of special counseling or something, emotional behavioral stuff that you may not have in affluent school districts. So they have more fixed costs. But the reality is this, those kids are getting a lot of funding. And no matter how much we increase funding, there is no actual, there hasn't been an actual increase in actual performance. The racial achievement gap has not narrowed at all. And so the reality is this, it's not really the funding. The reality is that pre-entry ability matters the most, right? If your kid is capable and understands how to do basic math and how to read and how to think critically, they're going to do fine regardless of the school they go to, whether it's a school in inner city Baltimore or whether it's a school in Greenwich, Connecticut, they'll do fine. And so I think that parents, quite frankly, need to stop putting all of the blame on the external factors in the environment, and they need to make sure that they're educating their kids at home, make sure that your kids can do basic math. Everyone knows how to read. I mean, hopefully you know how to read. Teach your own kids how to read. Make sure your kids are reading books. Make sure your kids are getting additional tutoring lessons. Don't let them play video games for 5 hours a day. And then you'll see a lot of these achievement gaps go away. But if we keep talking about funding school districts and, you know, we're going to have the same conversation 10 years from now. Nothing's going to change.
Cathy?
Yeah, that is excellent. It's not about funding. I'm here in Upper Arlington, Ohio, and Columbus City schools are failing, and they spend almost as much money per student as the suburban school. So it is not a matter of money. I've always felt a lot of people want to blame the teachers. Good schools have good principals. And if you go into the inner city schools, the ones that are successful are the ones who have good principals, who make sure their teachers are teaching, they make parents feel welcome, they make the children feel welcome. I student taught in an inner city school, and the building was dirty, and the principal, like, no parents wanted to come in. I mean, it wasn't a welcoming place. So there are solutions to what can happen in schools. We have to have parents who have the courage to go into those school boards and say, you need to succeed. I don't understand how having failing schools is okay. And again, the parent involvement is critical. And when you go into some of these failing schools, if those parents were in failing schools, they might be afraid to come into your school. And so you've really got to get the administrators and teachers to get those parents to come in and make them feel welcome and safe and give them the tools to help their kids.
So, Corey, from your experience, tell us what these elite students, because so much of our focus is on the failing, on the dismal grades, but yet sometimes we don't empower those that no matter what, they get through it, whether it's the parents, whether it's something special about them. Talk about what these kids actually do from your experience, that no matter what the circumstances are, they don't make excuses and they master that classroom, whether it's the math, the science, the English, or the history, or the foreign courses.
Yeah, so I think that a lot of research says that pre-entry ability matters most. So what I understand is that many kids who tend to be straight A students tend to come from families and backgrounds where that type of achievement is heavily valued. So they have a parent that will say that you need to have that clear expectations. You need to succeed in school. We don't accept any grade lower than an A. I think we all know kids who have that kind of background, and those are the types of kids who ended up getting the A's because their parents are the ones going to the parent-teacher conference. Their parents are the ones making sure they're doing the homework, making sure they understand the homework, making sure they're studying for the exams, right? So having parents really put that pressure on you matter the most. But I also think a lot of kids have that just, innate drive and determination sometimes to want to be better. I mean, a lot of people, we all instinctively know that there are rewards that come with education, right? If you're a straight A student, if you get a 34 in your ACT, you get into Princeton, you're going to have a much better chance at a better outcome in life than a kid that gets an 18 and ends up going to, community college. And I mean, it's probably not politically correct to say, but it's the truth. So I think having that internal motivation matters the most. I think a lot of kids have that motivation manifests itself in doing things like, for example, choosing to study ahead of the class, not necessarily waiting for teachers to teach you a subject or a concept, but going through the textbook and reading it yourself. I mean, I've worked with kids who were 4 or 5 chapters ahead in math than what we were in class because they took it upon themselves to actually go through and use that. And in a modern era where we have literally all the information in the world at our fingertips, everyone has this, whether you're poor or rich, everyone has a smartphone now. There are kids who I work with who they have used Khan Academy, they have used YouTube to self-study math, to self-study foreign language, to self-study English and history, to master these concepts and really understand them deeply. And so the thing is that everyone has the resources to succeed. Now, there is no excuse. You can go on you can go on social, you can go on YouTube, you can go on Khan Academy and have access to all this information and all this instruction. The reality is that people have to take personal responsibility. The kids that succeed are the ones that take personal responsibility. The ones who fail are often the ones who just don't.
Were you always at this level of understanding, or did you have to come around to it from experience and actually seeing it in real time?
Yeah, I actually had to come around to this because for a long time I was under the impression that, everyone is working equally as hard. It's just that, some kids and some people are just lucky enough to be born into wealthy families, so they have all these advantages. And some kids don't have those advantages, and that's why they struggle. Now, it is true, some people do have more advantages than others, right? Like if you are Jeff Bezos' son, you're going to have more advantages than the child whose mom is a postal worker, right? I mean, that's just a fact. But the truth is that if you look at the actual data, overall, test scores like standardized test, SAT, is not very heavily correlated with socioeconomic status. It's not. The truth is that, it is your actual intelligence, your knowledge, and all of that is accumulated over years and years of hard work. And the reality is that it's something that the way I learned this is just by working in these classrooms, seeing how kids behave, and also reading the data, because we actually have data on this. A lot of progressives don't want to look at the data because it conflicts with their narrative. But I think that people need to know the facts, because if they don't know the facts, we're going to be having this conversation 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and it's unfortunate.
Well, Cathy, I must tell you, I've had many discussions on education, and I must tell you, this is the best from you and Corey, and I appreciate it so much because we in the media must also learn and understand what works so we don't continue to repeat the same narrative that kids cannot learn. Just the simple things he said. the data for the SAT scores don't bear out that being from a socioeconomic advantage bears much in terms of the outcome. These stories need to be told. Much appreciation and respect to both of you, and we will definitely have you back on in the future. I'm Armstrong Williams. Thank you so much for joining us for this edition of the Armstrong Williams Show.
Thank you so much.
Excellent.